All right, I think we can get started. I apologize if there's any trouble with the link there. I sent out an email this morning and for some people it just disappeared. So I resent it. Seems you all made it, so it's great. We have a really good turnout tonight. Lots of people interested in joining, so we're glad to have you here. Just a couple housekeeping things. We will keep all participants muted throughout the presentation. And we encourage you to write any questions that you have in the chat throughout. And we'll welcome you to turn on your video at the end of the presentation as we dive into questions so we can see you. So we're going to run through some slides and we'll take some pauses for a couple polling questions along the way. And they'll pop up on the screen and I'll read the question out loud and give you a couple minutes to make your selection. So I'm Jenica Hunsinger. I'm the Ecological Forestry Coordinator at the Medway Community Forest Co-operative. And the MCFC is a settler-based organization that manages 15,000 hectares of crown lands in Annapolis County. We do this under ecological forestry principles, balancing multiple values, including timber harvesting, wildlife and ecology, recreation, research, and community engagement. So as we go forward into this evening's discussion, we recognize the lands we reside on and steward. I'm based in the village of Caledonia in Guestwick, or Southwest Nova Scotia. You good, Matt?
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, cool. So today, over 70% of forested lands in Guestwick or in Mi'kma'ki are privately owned. And on a path of reconciliation, as we're addressing private lands tonight, I'll note the concept of private ownership was unfamiliar to the original inhabitants of Nova Scotia in the land of Mi'kma'ki. We're speaking of the lands, its forests and waters in the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And we honor them as we speak of Hemlock, Uksuksk. Mi'kmaq traditional knowledge of Uksuksk must be incorporated into perspectives through two-eyed seeing and hemlock management, and Mi'kmaq consultation and engagement is ongoing. So our presenters this evening are Matt Miller, who is the operations manager at MCFC, and Donna Crosland, who's a longtime board member and our vice president. So with that, I'll pass it off to them and we'll get things started.
Thanks very much, Jenica. I'm going to just pull up our presentation here. Okay, yes, so thanks very much, everyone, for joining. Yeah, Jenica mentioned, really just thrilled with the turnout, really excited to see folks becoming engaged on this issue. The Medway Community Forest Cooperative is one of a number of organizations that are working on HWA issues in Nova Scotia. Tonight, our goal is to have a discussion with you folks, the stewards of hemlock in our province, about the pest and the threat it poses to our forests. Our goal is to share information on the pest, give you an update on the status of the outbreak, give you a sense of what to monitor on your own, on your lands and on your properties, so you're able to keep an eye on your hemlock trees. And then we're going to discuss some of the options that are available to you to control and manage HWA on the land that you steward. Ultimately, really the end goal here is for us to have a better understanding and identify how to best support hemlock conservation on privately held woodlands in the province. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Donna, whom we're very lucky to have with us tonight. She's been working on HWA issues since the pest was first detected in the province. I'll turn it over to Donna.
So thanks, Matt. Before I leave the cover slide, I'll just point out that on the left, we have a picture of Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, which we shortened to HWA. And those are the little white woolly sacs there that you can see on the underside of the hemlock needles, little branchlets. And in the middle, we have what many consider to be the most beautiful of all eastern trees, the eastern hemlock. And to our right, our dead and dying eastern hemlock, a picture taken by Natural Resources and Renewables from the southwestern end of Nova Scotia. Whoops, there. So eastern hemlock is considered to be the largest evergreen conifer in our eastern forests. And that's in terms of wood volume, how big it grows and the centuries it can live. So by many people's standards, this is the redwood of the East. It can reach girths of up to 90 centimeters, even up to a full 1 meter in diameter. And sadly, it comprises a large proportion of our last old growth forests in Nova Scotia. And so we're about to lose a lot unless we do something. And so that's what tonight's discussion is all about. And Tsuga canadensis is the scientific name for eastern hemlock. And I just want to point out that Tsuga in Japanese actually means mother tree. And it's probably named that because hemlock extends its protection to all other forest components that live beneath it. So eastern hemlock was ecologically very well suited to Nova Scotia and is currently as well. And the earliest forest classification for the Maritimes by Lukes designated the area that we see in salmon pink here on our map as the red spruce hemlock pine zone. It was the area where red spruce and hemlock attained their greatest prominence. And so there were once vast forests of eastern hemlock throughout this area of Nova Scotia. As well, you're probably wondering what's happened in eastern Nova Scotia and northern. Well, it was also considered by Lukes to be the red spruce hemlock pine zone, but reduced later on post-European settlement due to land clearance fires. And Luke's thinking that this may be the case was proven in my own research for my master's up in Rishabukto area at Kujabaquak National Park, where hemlock was indeed the second most dominant tree in the pre-European forest. Just a shout out to Cape Breton if people have joined us from there, that certainly there are hemlock forests, beautiful hemlock forests in Cape Breton, but it just wasn't as prominent as on mainland Nova Scotia. Cape Breton's got a lot of other things going for it. So those vast forests are now reduced to mere remnants, and what we see on the map here is the red areas, and perhaps you can see a few green specks. That's the hemlock, the mature and multi-aged hemlock stands that remain in Nova Scotia, and many of them exist just on the eastern sides of lakes. They've escaped fires and so forth. They also got decimated by the leather tanning industry, where the trees were felled just for their bark for tanning leather. So they're about 8% of forest land now, and most of the hemlock are found in private lands. And you're probably wondering, what is the yellow counties? What does that mean? Well, this is the area that the Canadian Food Inspection Agency has designated a regulated area. In other words, it's a quarantine zone. Well, what does it mean really? Well, it's a restriction on the movement of hemlock in any form, whether it's the bark, the wood chips, the logs themselves, or the foliage. And the reason why the CFIA has put this restriction on hemlock movement is obviously to protect forests in eastern and northern Nova Scotia and over in Cape Breton, because the longer we can stave off Hemlock Woolly Adelgid reaching those other forests, the less we might have to pay for treatments, or they'll be more intact if we can get biocontrols to work in Nova Scotia. So, and if we move along to the next slide, I've got some updates. Here we see the region in green, dark green on the map are once again the areas where hemlock occurs, and the red dots are the HWA detections that the CFIA is gathering, and you can see that it's rapidly spreading eastward. It was only detected in 2017 in the far southwestern counties of Yarmouth, Digby, and Shelburne, and now it's already spreading eastward in just a few years. And so already there's There's greater than 17,000 hectares of hemlock-dominated forest impacted, and there's already high mortality in Digby, Yarmouth, and Shelburne counties. And to update you, there's more bad news coming with the recent sightings, recent occurrences of HWA in Kings West, Kings South, and down in Bridgewater, all down in Lunenburg County. The CFIA is soon going to put restrictions like any day now on movement of hemlock in those counties as well. So that's news that's coming. And this is what hemlock looks like, or it looked like in 2017. I can only presume that now it's even worse. When hemlock have just died, they look like gray ghosts. Some people refer to them as that, because the needles turn kind of a gray cast, they drop, and so this is what you see, a backdrop of gray ghosts, dead and dying hemlocks with a background of green. Poll questions, take it away, Jenica.
All right, so I've launched the first question. What best describes your forested property? So I'll just give a couple minutes for this. Okay, we've got just about everyone here voted. I'll just give a few more seconds and then we'll switch to our second question. Awesome, so you should see the second question now pop up. What do hemlocks mean to you? I guess it does specify, what do your hemlocks mean to you? So it's great that everyone can vote now during the slides here and while we're chatting. And I will just note that we're going to follow up with a bit more of a detailed survey that should only take you about 5 minutes. So sometime maybe tomorrow or soon we'll send along another survey. That'd be really great if you folks could fill out. So I'll just give a couple more seconds here and then we'll close the poll. All right, thanks everyone for voting there. We should be all good to keep moving.
So back to hemlock. Eastern hemlock is considered a foundation tree species. It's really an exceptional tree that creates an entire unique ecological system all by itself. And it actually controls its own unique microclimate as well. So it tends to be cooler in the summer by several degrees, and it's warmer in the winter owing to the limbs and the canopy that intertwine, and they make this protective web that traps in the Earth's heat. And it also, that dense canopy intercepts the snow, and it makes the accumulation of snow on the forest floor much lower. So that's very attractive to the white-tailed deer. So the white-tailed deer prefer to go there, especially in the harsh winters. They'll yard up, like when the snows are deep. the endangered mainland moose, other mammals like the American marten, the fisher. There's a lot of wildlife that seek out hemlock stands, very important for wildlife. And I consider it kind of like Mother Nature's barn because of this dense canopy. It's kind of like stepping into a barn, especially if there's cold driving rains or snows in winter. I also wanted to mention that hemlock bird associates, that many of them that fly all the way from the tropics to breed in our hemlock forests in Nova Scotia, are nearly all in global decline. So this is also very important for wildlife habitat. So as we mentioned, it's a foundation tree, but it doesn't just extend its protection to the terrestrial ecosystem. It also, it lines rivers and lake edges. And so it's very much a riparian tree that extends its protection to our aquatic systems as well. And so shaded streams can be several degrees cooler, keeps them cool, which is very important for our cold water fishes like salmon and brook trout. And I'll share with you a secret that probably many fishermen already know, but brook trout can be 4 times more abundant in a hemlock-lined stream than in a hardwood forest. And so it's an incredible tree as well. When it's hot and sunny outside, hemlocks tend to shut down and they stop pumping water, whereas hardwood forests will continue pumping the water. And so streams are maintained at higher water levels in the summer if they flow through hemlock stands and if they flow through hardwoods. So that freshwater integrity is very much an important ecosystem service that hemlock forests provide. But on the right-hand side of the screen, I'm pointing to a hemlock forest that's now dead. I took it in 2020 on the Sisebou River, which is very near Bear River. Very devastating to see. As well, it's not just about risking losing the hemlock tree or hemlock forest itself, but it's all the unique biodiversity that goes with hemlocks. And so we know that just recently that we're learning all about the underground world of the forest, and there's certainly some mycorrhizal fungi. There's matsutake mushrooms, which are delicious. And many woodlot owners in the Southwest have made quite a few dollars every year picking matsutake mushrooms, and once you've tasted them, you really don't want to buy store-bought mushrooms. As well, the varnished mushroom, or the hemlock reishi as it's called, only grows on dead hemlock. And so it is or has been considered an important medicine, especially in Asian culture. It is immune boosting apparently, and it's been explored to deal with to cure women's breast cancer is one of the purposes of hemlock reishi. So it's, you know, we're losing these things before we even really fully know what they may serve to the rest of the world. And so there's stubble lichens like Chenothecopsis sugae that only grows on the resin of hemlock, which is pretty incredible. And other species of lichens, just to name a few of the unique biodiversity that we find in a hemlock stand. And so we're losing so much more than just hemlock when we think about all the factors. So hemlock and the climate emergency. We all are well aware by now that the carbon dioxide levels in our atmosphere have been steadily increasing since the 1800s. And with that, they lock in the heat from the earth. And so the average temperature of the globe is rising. And so what does this have to do with hemlock? Well, trees absorb carbon from carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So it's essentially a natural climate solution. And so the neat thing about hemlock is it's very much a superior carbon sequestration species. So it lives for centuries, so it's storing a lot of carbon in that large dimension timber. It has a very long growing season, so before our hardwoods even flush out in the spring, hemlock's already started absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere because it's got its needles, it's going in the early spring, and it's continuing to photosynthesize later in the fall after our hardwoods are shutting down. And So it really does store a lot of carbon both above ground and below ground. And so we now know that half the forest and half of our carbon stores can be below ground. And so old growth forests sequester and store the most carbon. And I just have a picture on the bottom left of me standing on some wind-fallen hemlock trunks, and also just to acknowledge that they decay very slowly on the forest floor. So they're still locking away that carbon for a very long time. Basically, to sum up, hemlock eat carbon dioxide for breakfast. And I think that's just really important to keep in mind when we're concerned about climate change. The loss of hemlock forests in Nova Scotia will lead to significant carbon dioxide emissions. The province is working on estimates right now, and they think it's maybe 16 to 21 million tons of carbon will be emitted if we lose our hemlock forest. And that's equivalent to roughly 1 year of the total provincial carbon emissions. So if we want to prevent carbon stores from contributing to even more greenhouse gas, maintaining a forest cover is one way to do it, and somehow finding a way to keep our hemlocks alive. And poll question 3.
All right, so it should pop up on your screen now. The question is, how familiar are you with HWA? All right, we've got nearly everybody, but I'll just give a couple more seconds. Awesome, thanks everyone for voting. I'm sorry, we only are giving you one choice. There'll be more choices in the follow-up survey. All right, let's continue.
Oh, are we done the third? Okay. Didn't realize I was on. So the star attraction is this little critter, an insect called the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, HWA, as we abbreviate it to be. What's the issue with this? Well, it's an invasive insect. It's from southern Japan. It arrived in our forests, and it's not behaving well. And so it's aphid-like in that it sucks nutrients and water from the base of the needles of the underside of hemlock branchlets. It's the outer growth of hemlock, the new growth where it tends to settle down. And its name comes from the fact that it secretes this white waxy wool from these little glands on the sides of its body. And it can cause, it's amazing that this little tiny insect, just merely sucking some sap from the tree, can cause mortality of a giant hemlock tree in as little as 3 to 4 years, up to 10 years, but it seems to be very rapid in Nova Scotia. It depends on a lot of variables. There's no natural predators, anything that eats it in Eastern North America that could keep the populations in check. And winter seems to be the only thing that really helps a little bit. Very cold temperatures, minus 25 degrees Celsius, preferably for a couple of days and nights in a row, can really knock it down. I understand that New York State this winter has a reduction of more than 90% winter mortality. And Natural Resources and Renewables is looking at mortality from winter effects here in Nova Scotia. We just don't know what it is just yet. So it was introduced into Virginia in around 1951, and from there it spread north and south. That's the red area on our maps. It's spread all up the eastern seaboard of the US. And so now it's roughly about 60% or more of the hemlock distribution area, the hemlock region, which is pictured there in light green. So it's rapidly proceeding northward. We used to think that maybe winters would slow it down, but it's adapting very well to Canadian winters or North American winters. HWA has the craziest life cycle, so hang on to your hat. I'll try to explain just the highlights of this crazy little bug. It has 2 generations a year, and they're all girls. So there's no sexual reproduction. We don't need males in this whole life cycle. And if we look at where we are right now in winter, if you focus on winter, because I don't know where the pointer is on the screen, maybe I've got it. Okay. Focused on winter, the girls have been growing all winter long and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And right now, if you want to check for Hemlock Woolly Adelgid on your woodlands, they're very, very visible. They're big white woolly balls right about now, and they're getting ready to lay eggs, which they'll do in a month or so from now. And then from the eggs hatch little crawlers, and they look like this. I'm circling with my cursor, I hope you can see it. They look like little eggs with legs, and so they're extremely tiny. They'll settle down at the base of needles and in amongst their mothers, usually is the case. And then they very rapidly grow and become larger themselves and lay their own eggs. I should say that some of those females become winged females, and they lead a very lonely life, short life, because they're off trying to find a mate and mate in spruce trees, a species that we don't have anywhere in North America. So that's a dead end. And so then the wingless females go on to lay eggs, which hatch very quickly. There's crawlers then that settle down at the base of the new growth. At this point, it's the spring of the year in Nova Scotia. The new needles have flashed, the new little branchlets, and they settle down there. They stick in their little feeding tubes, and then they don't do a thing for the rest of the summer. They don't feed, they don't move, they don't do anything. So that's it in a nutshell. But here's the scary part: 2 generations a year, and all of the girls being fertile all by themselves means one female, if it's placed on a hemlock branch, can produce up to 5,000 potential offspring annually, give or take. It could be more or less, it depends on a lot of variables, but one female, 5,000 progeny per year. So you can see how quickly populations can expand. I should also mention that with those crawlers, they fall off a lot in the forest. And so Jeff Fidgen, I know, has joined us in this meeting tonight, and he has looked into how many crawlers can fall down to the forest floor when there's a fairly heavy infestation, and it's over 1,100 crawlers per day in 1 square meter can be raining down on your heads, your pets, your camper trailers, and so on. So it's just when you're in an infested stand, you have to bear in mind that you can easily disperse these crawlers without knowing it. They're disseminated largely by birds. We seem to be blaming the birds, but the wool does get captured into their feathers, and so they're not eating the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid because it's too small really for them to go after. But when they're up there gleaning insects from the canopy, the little white woolly balls can stick to their feathers as well. Certainly it's a thing. Don't move firewood. It's something that I think we're going to have to get used to. We also have other invasives that are ruining our forests, like emerald ash borer, and it's more important than ever not to move firewood over long distances. As well, just a shout out to fishermen, when you're fishing hemlock-lined streams in the spring of the year, that's the very same time that there's a lot of crawlers and eggs falling from trees. And if you go to a pristine area later on, if you're fishing in an infested area, you move to a new area to fish for the afternoon, you may inadvertently disperse HWA to a new area. And so it's very important to clean off those pets. Use kind of a best practices, try to avoid going into multiple hemlock stands all on the same day. Wash your clothing before you go into a new area. Use boot brushes. Sticky packing tape really works, and lint brushes, but do our best. Does it seem futile, this? Well, maybe, but if you leave, say, Kejimkujik National Park, where there's lots of crawlers falling on your camper trailer and yourself, and then you walk into Victoria Park in Truro, all in the same day, you can easily transfer HWA to a whole new county. So it's very important that we all take these precautions. And lastly, my last message is, I know many of you have probably joined tonight because you're interested in protecting your hemlocks if you can. And so, some of the best advice that we can give you is to try to maintain healthy live crowns. It's because those healthy crowns are essential for pulling the chemical from the base of the tree. If you choose chemical control, you need to have the canopy to act as a pump to pull the chemical up to the canopy to kill the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. Canopy density can't drop below 65%, or you run the risk of, if you did treat the trees, that it wouldn't work. Also monitoring your trees for Hemlock Woolly Adelgid population. Now's a good time. If you're going out on a winter walk, there's lots of branch tips that have fallen on the ground. It's like a big canopy sample of the forest from the freezing rains and the windstorms of the past winter. And so you get to see Hemlock Woolly Adelgid by just picking up branches on the ground, but also low hanging branches. Just look on the underside and see if you can see any white woolly balls. Trees with heavy HWA infestations, start thinking about or considering treating these trees right away. That's the advice of Dr. Mark Whitmore. He's with Cornell University and has been researching HWA for a long time. Also look for new growth in the spring, that flush of new growth, this lime green color. If you're not seeing that, rapid death is nigh, it's coming. So also look for colors of needles fading to yellow or gray, and consider treating old growth in advance of nearby infestations. If you know your neighbor's lot has HWA or it's just down the road, it's nearby, the advice given to us is don't wait for a decline, because old growth can take a long time to conduct. If you choose chemical treatment, it can take up to a year for it to conduct into the canopy. And 1 year can make a big difference with the way HWA is spreading right now. I failed to explain the crown density scorecard. So here we have if you're wondering how you would possibly know if your canopy density is less or greater than 65%, this little card is going to be available on the Community Forest website, and you can print it off. And believe it or not, it's just the handiest tool. You go out, you stand under the tree, as we can see a picture of Matt doing here, look straight up into the canopy, and then you can compare the canopy to these little circles on the scorecard, and you'll be able to tell if your canopy is declining. And if you notice your trees getting lighter, you need to move fast, is the advice of Dr. Whitmore, and he knows what he speaketh. And now over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Donna. Yeah, and just a note on that canopy, the canopy density scorecard, the picture of me looking up at the tree is from our project at Sporting Lake in the summer. That was my first time using that scorecard, and Donna and I were both scoring trees and we're within 5 or 10% pretty much every time of one another. So it is a very handy tool. It can be a great way to monitor the health of your trees. So now we're going to talk about HWA control options, the different methods and that you'll have to be able to help protect your hemlock trees. The first one is chemical control. Right now, this is the only option available to keep trees alive. It is considered a short to a medium term option. So we're going to talk about the different chemical products, different application systems, the safety and non-target impacts, and also costs of chemical treatment. We're also going to discuss biological control. Biological control is the long-term solution. It is still in a research phase. It's something that we're going to that has been developed in the United States that we're going to have to develop here. But that really is the kind of long-term, large-scale control that's going to help us manage and live with this pest and save our hemlock trees.
And we're also going to discuss integrated management. So this would be a blending of chemical and biological control, the relationship between the actions that we take in the short term to protect trees using chemical control, and how that's going to influence and really make opportunities for us to advance biological control in the future. So another couple more poll questions here.
All right, so I just launched question 4. Which statement best describes your concerns regarding the pest?
I like the should be music. Yeah, I think we should sing something.
Are you singing, Donna?
Nope.
They're coming in. This one's a little bit slower. That's okay. And I will just remind everyone as we're getting into some complicated stuff here that, like, if there are any questions, just type them in the chat and we'll answer them when we wrap up.
I'll just give a shout out to Jeff Fidgen. I see he's very busy in the chat, and I'm grateful he's answering some questions, I think, and being a biocontrol research scientist, we're happy to have such expertise joining us for this meeting.
Okay, I'll just give a couple more seconds for this question, and then we'll switch to number 5. Okay, number 5's come up. Which of the following HWA treatment options are you familiar with? Interesting. We can do some art.
Is that you?
No, it wasn't me. Scott's iPhone did it. We've nearly got everyone in. I'll just give a couple more seconds and we'll close the poll here. All right, so that's it for those polls, and there's just one more after a few more slides here.
Thanks very much, Janica. Yeah, and it's great to see some questions coming into the chat. Really appreciate that. We'll make sure to circle back to any of those at the end. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about chemical control next. I'm laughing at that red line. I don't know where that came from, but that's all right. Hopefully it's not too much of a distraction. But yeah, so on the chemical control side, there may be some folks who are feeling a little bit uncomfortable or uncertain about the idea of using pesticides to save your trees or on your property. I'll admit, I had to note my own sort of feeling of discomfort when I first learned about this issue. And I think upon reflection for me, it was a little bit based on the lack of education and some of the misconceptions I had about what this would mean. So like this photo that we're showing, aerial glyphosate application for vegetation management. these types of open applications and environmental exposure just aren't an option for HWA control. It just simply wouldn't work. It's not an option that's even approved with the primary chemical that's used in HWA control. And so this is not at all what we're talking about. What it is actually is a very targeted application to individual trees in small doses. So quite a bit different perhaps than some of the sort of imagery or thinking that you may have when you consider or hear about the idea of using pesticides in the forest. So when we talk about chemical control, just again, right now at this point in time, it's the only effective short-term control available. If your property is in the 7 counties that are part of the infestation right now, this is going to be the thing that's going to help your trees remain alive. So the primary chemical that's used is imidacloprid. It's a neonicotinoid chemical, and neonicotinoids have gotten a bad reputation, perhaps deservedly so, primarily around the non-target impacts associated with their use in an agricultural setting. So in agriculture, they're often broadcast sprayed on a field. It's had a terrible impact on pollinators and other non-target insects. And so, yeah, just acknowledging that this is the same class of chemical, but again, as you can see with the photos of the injection systems that we have, that this is a fundamentally different approach to the application of it. So these chemicals work, they're very targeted towards insects, and what they do is they bind to the neuroreceptors of insects. And because insects' neurological systems are so fundamentally different from mammals and birds, and other species, that it is very targeted. The benefit of neonicotinoids is that they are very targeted towards insects, and they don't have the same level of at all lethality towards other animals. And so the product is applied directly to the tree. Either in some applications it would be applied to the outside in a sprayed solution. And others, it would be like the ones pictured here, it would be injected directly into the stem of the tree after you drill a small hole and attach either a canister or what's known as a quick jet air system. The product then moves throughout the tree by natural action. It's soluble with the tree sap, and the tree naturally moves that throughout the entire tree using its own natural sap flow. And then the product protects the tree from within, so that when the Hemlock Woolly Adelgid lands on the needles of the tree and begins to feed on them, they ingest the chemical and they die. And so right now, stem injections with a product known as Imajet is the only approved and practical method currently available for HWA control. So what you're doing with Imajet, and that's the product that's being applied in both of the pictures on this slide, you would drill small holes in the base of the tree, spaced roughly equal distance apart around the base of the tree. The number of holes controls the dose and is dependent on the size of the tree. And then you inject the chemical directly into the tree through that very close containment system. So treatment timing is key to effectiveness. And I just noticed one of those questions in the chat. So it's recommended for treating light to moderate HWA infestations. As Donna mentioned, you don't want to let the density of your crown drop below 65%, because you want to make sure that the tree has enough growth capacity and is healthy enough to be able to transport the product throughout the tree. The flip side of that is you don't want to act too early, because we want to limit the amount of pesticide we are putting out there onto the landscape, just from a safety and environmental perspective. And also as a landowner, you want to be thinking about cost. You don't want to act too soon, but you want to act soon enough. So if you're up in the central part of the province, you just need to continue to keep your ear to the ground, monitor where the infestations have moved, monitor your trees. If you're in the 7 counties where the pest exists right now, you're going to want to you're going to want to be keeping a very close eye on it. And as Donna mentioned, if you happen to have a very what would you consider perhaps a primordial or a very old growth forest, you may want to treat in advance of the infestation when it's within a kilometer or two of those very sort of high value older trees that perhaps would be but more susceptible to decline once they do become stressed from infestation. Once you inject the hemlock, there is a bit of an uptake period, so you need to consider that into the timing as well. It takes 3 to 6 months and possibly as long as a year for the chemical to move throughout the tree and provide protection. And again, trees have to be healthy enough to be able to facilitate that. Once the trees are injected, the products will provide anywhere between 4 and 7 years of protection. So, you know, as a general rule, you're going to want to maybe be thinking about treating your trees every 5 years. And again, we'll talk about this later. It's sort of that bridge between until the biocontrol becomes an option. So I'm going to show you a short video of this is the quick jet air system. So in this case, the small holes have already been drilled into the base of the tree. With this particular system, you'd attach a small cap, and then the product is injected directly in. And I think you'll notice how much of a closed system we're talking about.
It's a beautiful thumb.
Yeah, so very, very straightforward. There's another chemical control option hopefully going to become available to us here in Canada right now. It's not yet approved. We're hoping that it will be. It's called Zytec 2F. It's a basal bark application, and so a little different from the stem injections. You would apply the solution to the outside of the tree, work your way around it. One of the advantages to that is that you don't have to drill holes, which are a wound to the tree. And anybody who taps maple trees know that, you know, a robust, mature tree is going to be able to handle some, you know, a couple of holes, some number of holes being drilled in it every few years. But the basal bark application has an advantage in that the product is applied to the bark and is absorbed to the tree through the bark and doesn't involve any injection ports. At least in the United States, again, it's not approved here yet, but it's much cheaper in terms of chemical cost. And then the application is much more efficient as well. So the chemical cost is cheaper. The application cost is generally cheaper, considered to be cheaper as well. So there is significant cost savings there. In the United States anyway, we expect it could be a similar situation here. There are product application limits. You're only allowed to apply 1.89 liters per hectare per year. And so if you have a lot of hemlock trees on your property or a very heavy stand of hemlocks, it may require multiple entries. So that's important to consider, you know, so you would be limited in terms of the amount of hemlock you could treat in a given year, and it may cause you to have to make some decisions in at least in the early phase. I think one of the benefits to this potentially is it would spread the cost out over multiple years, but it may require making some decisions about which trees become saved. So we got another short video of Corey Hughes, former classmate of mine, applying Zytec on a research trial here in Nova Scotia.
Who has joined the meeting.
So just a bit of an explanation there. With the stem injections, it's the number of injection ports that determines the application rate, which is determined by tree diameter. With the Zytec basal bark applications, it's time, and that's why you could hear somebody calling out the time. So just looking at costs, and just to sort of qualify this at the outset, your costs are going to vary depending on the chemical and the application system that you use. So for stem injections, there's a number of different systems out there, some of which would be approachable for an intrepid woodlot owner who wanted to purchase the equipment themselves and become a pesticide operator. could be a significant cost saving if you were going to inject your own trees. Some of the injection equipment is more sophisticated. It's meant for higher productivity and is more appropriate for a professional setting. And you may be in a situation where you'd have to pay a pesticide operator to come and treat your trees for you. And again, these chemical costs can range. The Imajet at $250 a liter is a bit of a blended price that we're sort of pegging. There can be a range depending on certain factors. Zytec 2F isn't yet approved here, and we're estimating its cost, which is significantly less. And so on the right-hand column, you'll see that if you were going to treat a 40 centimeter tree, which would be diameter breast height at about 4 feet off the ground, measure the diameter. If it was about 40 centimeters, which is a fair average for a mature hemlock stand. Currently with Imajet, the product cost alone would be about $16. And hopefully when Zytec, if it becomes available, you'd see significant cost savings there. So additional to those costs could be things like equipment and arborist or pesticide applicator. Key message here is it is an investment. It's not an investment you'd have to make hopefully in perpetuity. We're hopeful that biocontrol can be the long-term solution. And hopefully there are significant cost savings on the horizon with additional product becoming available. So imidacloprid treatments have been going on in Nova Scotia. This will be the 4th year of trees being treated with imidacloprid. It started with CFS, Canadian Forest Service, leading research trials starting in 2019 in a number of protected areas in the Southwest, Pollard's Falls, Sisebou, McKay Lake, Silver Lake. Some of you folks may have heard about Kejimkujik Park and National Historic Site treating the hemlocks and hardwood trails in the fall of 2021. You may have seen some of that in the media. We're aware there are a number of cottage homeowners, woodlot owners in Shelburne, Queens, Yarmouth, and Digby counties who have had private treatments done. And all of the 3 of us on the call with you tonight, we're all part of a team that led that was part of a volunteer-led initiative to do a complete stand treatment on Sporting Lake Nature Reserve down in Digby County in the fall of 2021. Yeah, certainly been some activity here to save some hemlock trees. So really important, I think, to discuss the safety when we're talking about chemical use. And so as part of any approved chemical in Canada would be subject to stringent approval process through the PMRA, the Pesticide Management Regulatory Authority. As a imidacloprid is registered for use by Health Canada as well, and then the province has completed its own pre-assessment risk analysis. And so so before it's even allowed to be used for any use, it would go through those type of rigorous approval processes. The literature, there's been a lot of literature from the United States where there is a longer history of using these products to promote to save hemlock trees. In Nova Scotia, and Donna will speak to this, we've been doing replicating a lot of this research here in the province, and the literature is pretty firm that imidacloprid is a safe pesticide when used appropriately to save hemlock trees. And you may not know it, but some of you may be already using imidacloprid on your pets. It's a very commonly used product for flea and tick control due to its low toxicity to mammals. And it's interesting that the 2 of the more common products for flea and tick control, Advantage 55 and K9 Advantix, both of them have a fairly higher concentration and a much more repetitive application rate as opposed to imidacloprid, which would be a lower concentration and only applied every 5 years. I'm going to turn it over to Donna. She's going to discuss some non-target impacts.
So some of you are asking, and I see that because I've been seeing lots of activity in the chat, and we'd love to answer as we go. But I've got Jeff Fidgen is one of our experts, as I said previously. I think John Sweeney's on the call, Cora Hughes. There's a lot of very knowledgeable people with us tonight that are also capable of answering those questions. I've been working with this for longer than Matt and I. But basically, one of the questions that we all have at the beginning of this is, if I use these chemicals, what else may be harmed? In other words, what are the impacts to non-target organisms? Because yes, we want to get rid of the HWA, but the chemical is lethal to all arthropods, all bugs, basically, in the forest. So Elizabeth McCarty is a research scientist in the USA, did a lot of research on these effects in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And I think she says it best. She just says the negative environmental consequences of hemlock mortality, in other words, losing your whole hemlock forest, must be weighed against the known consequences of insecticide use to preserve the hemlocks. So there are some consequences, but let's review them just quickly. This is one of Elizabeth's drawings, but she starts out with imidacloprid applied to the soil. They do a lot of soil drench applications where they're just pouring it right into the mineral soil or injecting it into the soil. That's not really something that happens here, that we don't intend for it to happen. Yet with the basil bark application, some of that basil bark chemical could contaminate the soil underneath the tree at the tree base. It's important to recognize this, that we now know from the research that's been conducted thus far that from about 50 centimeters out from the tree trunk at the base, 50 centimeters out, there is a significant mortality of arthropods, specifically springtails, or the snow fleas as we call them. It's not all arthropods, but there is some mortality. But 1 meter out from the tree base, it's already significantly dropping off to pretty negligible amounts. And just to remember that if we did treat a hemlock stand, that this impact to soil then is really only 2% of the whole forest stand, all the soil surface. So it's very, very localized, and it's also short term. The insects rebound very quickly. Well, the idea though is that the chemical is going to be conducted upwards into the canopy, where it does kill off all of the arthropods in the canopy. Again though, so far research has shown that this is short-lived, and about 2 years following treatment, most of the arthropods rebound, and certainly after 3 years, the bugs are back. Hemlock Woolly Adelgid is still dead, being affected by the imidacloprid treatment, but the bugs and the birds, the natural native pests, native forest insects are back in the canopy. There's also, we're concerned about other ways that contamination can, I think the cursor worked. Yeah, other ways, we're wondering about needle drop. We know hemlock hangs on to its needles for about 3 years. And so those needles can drop on the forest floor or even into water. So that is all being researched by the Canadian Forest Service scientists. And has been extensively researched in the US as well. So we're building on their research, and so far effects appear to be quite negligible. We're also wondering about pollinators, impacts to pollinators. Of course, we know what neonicotinoids have been devastating to bee pollinators in agricultural settings. We must keep in mind this isn't an agricultural setting. Hemlocks don't attract bees because they're wind pollinated. So there's not a lot of bees buzzing around hemlocks, but there are some forest floor plants, some flowering plants. And so that is being researched right here in Nova Scotia by Dr. Kirk Hillier's lab at Acadia University. And there's several, there's at least 2-3 students working on those effects. As well, we're looking at movement of the chemical through the soil. We know that the chemical binds to the soil quite well, so there doesn't appear to be a lot of movement, but it depends on the clay particles in the soil and so forth. So that is being researched by, again, the Canadian Forest Service scientists. And certainly we're interested in making sure that this chemical isn't affecting benthic invertebrates like the mayflies and the caddisfly stonefly larvae in streams. So this has been researched by Dr. McCarty, both upstream and downstream of treatment areas. And as well, like I say, Canadian Forest Service scientists are looking at those effects. So we are, the scientific community is absolutely taking, making a list and checking it twice in terms of non-target organisms, really double checking, trying to mitigate any risks to the environment. As well, I just want to give a shout out that the Canadian Forest Service is also examining tree azin, which is another chemical. It's an organic compound that is derived from the neem tree, and specifically the neem seed oil. And so it's not as toxic, and it's already early days, but it appears to be quite effective in the short term at knocking out Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. However, it doesn't last very long. So it doesn't last long, but it acts fast, it appears. So this could lessen the use of neonicotinoid chemicals. So we're trying to be as responsible as we can. So there's a whole team of researchers, as I've just referred to, that are researching these non-target effects. We don't have time to go into the huge, long list, but we're pretty proud that there's no stone almost being left unturned. We're setting up those funnel traps in the canopy and the sub-canopy that capture insects to sample the insect community before and after treatment to see if there's any difference. We see a picture of Cody Chapman in the bottom right-hand corner. He's not praying. He's actually doing some research of the understory flora. And he's, anyway, so there's a long list. Kejimkujik as well is sponsoring a lot of this work. And they're looking at fungi in the forest floor. Natural Resources and Renewables is researching the HWA life stages. So it's just a huge collaborative effort. Everybody asks, so we'll spend just a second addressing this. People say, what about the birds? And fair enough, but if you remember, neonicotinoid, this imidacloprid chemical, is a neurotoxin that affects insects. It isn't really very impactful on mammals or birds. And so the birds may consume insects, but it's not lethal to them. And so songbird insectivores, the birds that are consuming the insects in the canopies of hemlocks, have not incurred any direct negative effects from imidacloprid. And that is a peer-reviewed, there are a couple of peer-reviewed published papers there. In fact, what we notice is instead that if you leave your hemlock forest die, then the birds are affected because they lose their food source and they lose their shelter. And so chemical treatments are actually important for maintaining the hemlock bird associates in the forest. Biological control. You're probably wondering by now, how long do I have to keep treating my hemlocks if that's something that I choose to do? Well, help is on the way and looking pretty hopeful, but biological control, ooh, it sounds scary. What's involved? We asked. Well, it involves right now introducing predators from the West Coast of BC and the Western US. Where and why the West Coast? Well, come to find out, Hemlock Woolly Adelgid, another strain of it, lives on the West Coast, and it attacks hemlock, the Western hemlock trees on the West Coast, but it doesn't kill them. Why doesn't it kill them out there? Because there are a suite of native predators, little insects that consume Hemlock Woolly Adelgid. So scientists have been going to the West Coast for some time now, collecting insects that appear to be consuming HWA, and bringing them back to the lab and testing them. There is very stringent testing and oversight before any biocontrol would ever be released in a Canadian forest. There's a lot of rules. There's been a lot of lessons learned the hard way about biocontrols, so it's not as scary as it sounds. What we do know now, we're thankful that we can build on the research that's taken place in the US over the past couple of decades, because it speeds up our process considerably, that it requires not just one predator insect, it's going to require at least two to control both generations of HWA. As you recall, there were 2 generations. And so we've got one beetle, a little black beetle, it's tiny, it's called Laricobius, or a little Larry, as we like to call him. That's the one that hits the first generation of HWA. And so the problem with him is he pupates and falls to the forest duff, and he's not around when the second generation of HWA hatches out and they're being active. So we need a second predator. The silverfly, Leucotoraxis, quite a name, right? Leucotoraxis, sounds fierce. Well, it's a little tiny silverfly, and news just this week from Dr. Whitmore at Cornell University in the US is that they have found silverflies, alas, overwintering in New York State. And if they can survive New York State winters, they can definitely survive Nova Scotia winters because their winters are more severe. So things look hopeful, but we're cautiously optimistic that help really is on the way, maybe sooner rather than later. And in the States, then they're looking at how do you integrate the chemical control that you need in the short term to keep the trees alive so that you can benefit from the biocontrol. How do you integrate the two together? Well, this is a schema that's put together by Dr. Mayfield in the US, and he's looking at a variety of trees. If you picture a stream in your woodlot or somewhere, you can have trees that you permanently protect fully, that you monitor, and you might continue to chemically inject them. And then some trees that you just treat for a short period, and then some trees you don't treat at all. And that's where HWA would live. And you then, the little red circles there are where you would release the predator insects. And so they're going to feed on the trees that aren't treated at all. They'll build up populations. And then the hope is that they can fan out and gradually, as the populations build, perhaps you can stop treating your trees completely and the biocontrols will take it from there. And that's the long-term vision and hope. And it sounds like it could be realistic. Poll question 6. We're getting near the end, folks. I just love the questions in the chat. Keep it up.
All right. Yeah, lots of discussion. So I've just launched the final poll question here. How do you feel about investing money and time into preserving hemlock using chemical treatments? So we'll take a few minutes to vote here. I recognize we're gone a bit over time, so we understand if you can't hang on. We'll definitely follow up and answer some of those questions that we don't have time to answer tonight. And we'll follow up with a detailed survey that we hope you can fill out for just take 5 minutes. So they're still trickling in. So I'll just wait a couple more seconds here before we close this poll. I will say I tried to make the red line go away and I just don't have the power to. I think it adds to the slides really. Okay, we pretty much have everyone. So just a few more seconds here and I'll close the poll. All right. I think you should be good to keep going there.
I can't remember who goes next.
Oh, it'd be me. Thanks, Jenica. It's really fun to watch the poll answers coming in, and I like the red line too. So what we just talked about were the two options for controlling the pests. So if your trees become infected, you can use chemicals to, you can use the chemicals we discussed to fight off the pest. Long term, we're hoping to be able to establish biocontrols. You may be thinking maybe you're not comfortable with the idea of chemical control, or maybe ultimately even with support financially or otherwise, you may not be able to save all the trees on your woodlot if you have a lot of hemlock. And so there is a role for silvicultural, and when I say silviculture, I mean partial harvesting, uneven age management, the type of forestry that works with the disturbance dynamics of the Acadian forest. There is a role for silviculture in terms of helping to mitigate the impacts of HWA and ultimately helping keep your woodlot as healthy as possible in light of this pest. And I think the first thing really is to stress is just to avoid preemptive salvage harvesting. It's unclear at this point to what extent our trees in Nova Scotia may or may not be genetically resistant to HWA. So if you harvest before they're even infested, you could be missing out on an opportunity to help advance genetic resistance. The heavy cuts in hemlock stands don't work with the types of complementary species like white pine and red spruce and tolerant hardwoods like sugar maple and yellow birch. It doesn't work with that. When Donna talked about a lot of the benefits of hemlock forests in terms of the unique habitat and unique biodiversity they support, the carbon sequestration, you know, just panic harvesting and cutting down all your woodlot really is just not the way that we'd like folks to go. There is a role for silvicultural thinnings, and it may help your trees withstand the infestation longer. So if you're able to go in and thin your tree, select out some of the poorer ones, create more space and light and nutrients for your more healthy hemlock trees, there is a chance that may help them withstand the infestation longer. Really important to understand that this is an early intervention strategy. You would need to do this at least 5 years in advance, 4 or 5 years in advance of any type of infestation of your trees. And so this may not be a viable option for landowners in the western end of the province, in the 7 counties where the pest is already established, but certainly landowners in the central mainland or eastern part of the province up in Cape Breton. This may be something to consider in advance of the infestation to help get your woodlot and get your trees as vigorous and healthy as possible in advance of this pest. This type of a thinning or a silvicultural harvest could also help mitigate the impacts on your woodlot by diversifying the forest stand. So if you have some of those other species like white pine, red spruce, tolerant hardwood, you may be able to intervene ahead of time or even after the pest has arrived and help diversify your forest by promoting those other species. And certainly that's something that MCFC that we're a big part of. The approach that we take on our license areas on Crown is certainly fits with that, and it's part of the work that we've been doing with MCFC, or sorry, with the Canadian Forest Service. Really important to understand, you know, if you are going to intervene in your hemlock stands, just like any other forestry operation, you're going to want to be really careful to not introduce more stress into those stands. So, and hemlocks in particular are very sensitive to root damage. So being very careful to avoid excessive ground disturbance, operate when the stands are dry or frozen, avoiding damage to soils and roots and residual trees. So with that, we have kind of wrapped up. I want to just highlight a couple of additional HWA resources for landowners. The Medway Community Forest Co-op does offer integrated pest management services for woodlot owners. So if you are interested in some additional information or some time in the woods with one of the staff, that is a service that we've provided in the past. The Nova Scotia Hemlock Initiative is a great resource. It's a partnership with lots of information on HWA, and Giants in Nova Scotia is another website and social media account. Great follow if you're on social media. Check it out. Real focus on old growth forests and invasive species. Yeah, it's a great follow. It's one I really enjoy. There's going to be another talk on HWA coming up on April 23rd at the Western Woodland Conference. It's going to be in New Ross at the 40 Civic Center. If you want more information on that, check out nswoods.ca. In the United States, where they've been dealing with hemlock for quite a bit longer than we have, there's lots of great resources and initiatives happening down there. Check out the New York State Hemlock Initiative. They also have a great social media presence. They show volunteer-led treatments that happen quite a bit down there. If you're a forest owner and you're wondering about how you may use silviculture to manage hemlock impacts on your woodlot, there's a great resource, again, from the United States. I've got the image there, silvicultural options for managing hemlock forests. Great sort of resource there to help just understand how you can intervene, kind of more so from the mitigation approach as opposed to control, but it's a good reading, very geared towards landowners. And if you are interested in that type of an approach, the Association for Sustainable Forestry's Category 7 Silviculture Program is a great opportunity to be able to receive some financial assistance for uneven age management on your woodlot. So thanks for sticking with us. It always seems to take longer to go through it than it does when you practice. I know there's lots of questions, so I'm just going to
just going to get down off my screen here, and wow, 84 people going in the chat. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been great, and a lot of those questions are being answered throughout, which is awesome. So thanks, folks, for jumping in there. I've scrolled way up to the top here, and I know I get that it's getting late. So if you have to jump off, we'll be sure to follow up with you. So don't feel like you're missing anything. We'll follow up on questions and give you an opportunity to ask us more questions as well. But one from early on was, can drone detect presence of HWA in the spring?
I would say I did see that question. I think it's from Tom, isn't it? Tom Rogers. We've worked with drones a little bit in Kejimkujik National Park, and it's more to check on hemlock decline. Right, Matt's prompting me though to talk about headlamps, which I'll do, but drones can certainly detect, especially if you do some kind of multispectral photography, can note whether your hemlock canopy is being affected. But the Hemlock Woolly Adelgids themselves are too small to pick up with most drone cameras. It's not really used. But one of the rinky-dink tools that Mark Whitmore uses in the US is a 2000 lumens headlamp. So a very, very powerful headlamp with a focusable beam. So you can really hone in, and then he looks up into the canopy and he can see the white wax from the Adelgid in the canopy. And so he doesn't leave home without it. So if you want to invest in a very powerful headlamp, that's a good tool for detection.
Awesome. Great. And scrolling through here, Doug asked, is there a minimum size of tree that's practical to treat?
Do you want to take that, Matt, or do you want me?
Yeah, I think generally around 15 centimeters would be the limit, and especially for stem injection, because anything smaller than that, you could be doing damage with the holes. I'm aware that with basil bark spray, you're able to treat smaller trees. So with the Zytec, that will create an option, which is really important because those understory and mid-story trees are going to be important for us to be able to hang on to, so that when it's time to release the biocontrol, the insects, they're going to need something to kind of work their way up into the canopy. And so, so for stem injections, it would be around 15 centimeters or 6 inches. Zytec hopefully will allow us to expand that and treat smaller trees, and yeah, something we're going to need to think about in the future while we think about biocontrol.
In fact, I just learned last week that Michigan actually does basil bark spray of its small trees, because it does want to keep the range of ages and sizes there for the biocontrols, and that it injects the larger trees. And don't forget, they're dealing in the US with a limit on how much Zytec they're allowed to use per year per hectare. So that works. So we'll have to see how it rolls out here in Nova Scotia.
So I'm scrolling through. I'm trying not to double up on questions that have been answered there. So
I did see one on biocontrol that I went, oh, I should have mentioned that. And they were saying, will the predator insects move to other food sources if they run out of HWA? And that's a really important question to answer. And all of those insects would go through stringent starvation testing. And in the US, in fact, they've had quite a time. If HWA does all die out, the little Larry, the Laricobius beetle, does in fact die out. It just starves. So, and that's exactly what we want a biocontrol to do.
And just on the biocontrol, I know it sounds sort of futuristic and it's easy to think of the bad examples of unintended consequences, but there are some success stories from biocontrol, even here in Nova Scotia. European spruce sawfly was one pest, as well purple loosestrife. So there are some success stories, and certainly we're starting to see some positive momentum happen in the United States as well.
Gosh, it's really great to see Canadian Forest Service, as well as Natural Resources and Renewables, Dan Levine. There are people with a lot of expertise out there that are helping us answer the questions, which is super great. I really thank all of my colleagues on this call.
I know I keep scrolling and then I find the answer. So I just keep looking here.
It's just nice to see the interest. You know, it's clear everyone really cares about hemlock and no one wants to see them all die. And we have to have hope that if we try some things, at least we can save a very small portion. We're still going to lose a lot of hemlock, even if we treat chemically. But if we can at least prioritize and treat the high priority stands and our oldest growth, we can at least preserve some of that biodiversity that makes Nova Scotia special and keeps all the parts, as we say. Maybe this is a good place to leave off. I think we're saving the chat so we can share it with everyone and try to answer.
Yeah.
Some more questions come in. I think I saw a double question on resistance, and I think the answer is that there doesn't seem to be much genetic resistance so far. I think that's the case in the United States as well. But yeah, so the plan, as Jenica mentioned, is we do have a follow-up survey, a little more detail. We'd love if you could take a few minutes to fill that out for us. If there's anything that we missed, we'll include some of that information in the email that will have the survey in it as well. So if there is additional information, and certainly feel free to reach out to us at any time. And yeah, anything else, Jenica?
No, that's great. I just got to the bottom of the chat. It's great to have so much activity through, and we had a really great turnout tonight. So thank you all so much for tuning in and getting involved.
I'll just say, don't give up hope out there. That's the biggest take-home message, is that we're working on things. If you can just put your trees on some life support in the interim, maybe it'll be worth the investment in the long term. So we have to hope.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll look out for an email from me as a follow-up and do that survey for us. It'll be great. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Everybody.